Failings, errors, omissions. They cost the life of Zara Alina.
This monster was given a licence to walk free, and probation have blood on their hands.
Terry Harris and 3 children.
It could have quite easily been prevented. I think the entire system's broken, really broken.
Mistakes which left families devastated.
So many people's lives are wrecked just because someone could do the job properly. Sorry is not good enough. I think this can't keep happening.
There is a grim familiarity to these cases. A bereaved family, a review into what went wrong, a promise that lessons will be learned. But lessons are not being learned. A probation inspectorate report last year said mistakes are simply being repeated. Too little professional curiosity from frontline staff, poor management, high workloads, and critically, too often, probation officers underestimating the risk of serious harm. Sonia is a senior frontline probation officer who agreed to speak to us anonymously about a service she says she was once proud of, but now fears will continue to make the sort of mistakes which have already cost people their lives.
I do empathise. I can't begin to think what a nightmare that is. And if it was me, how angry I would be that this has happened and the mistakes were made and that it could have been prevented. I cannot feel their level of grief and anger, and I wouldn't pretend that, but I am angry because this shouldn't be happening like this.
Successive inspectorate reports have criticised the service, saying frontline staff are repeatedly failing to learn the lessons of these terrible cases. They're consistently, or too often, underestimating risk. What is that about? Is that about training? Is it about recklessness, complacency, overwork?
The more complex and riskier cases, the more resource is allocated to it. Quite sensibly, there is some pressure, there is some organisational pressure to lower the risk rating because you can pass more cases on to a person if they're less resource heavy.
I mean, that's an extraordinary idea, that somebody might be assessed as a lower risk, almost as an issue of workflow.
Yeah.
Analysis of Ministry of Justice figures shared with Channel 4 News by Labour's Justice team reveals that on average, one serious offender on probation is found guilty of murder every week. Since 2010, almost 700 people have been murdered by someone on probation. In that same period, there have been more than 950 rape or attempted rape convictions of people being supervised by probation. The total number of serious further offence convictions between 2010 and 2021 stands at 3,219.
Her energy was massive. Like, anybody who knows her would know about her, if that makes sense. Like, she'd walk into a room and everybody'd be like, oh. So, yeah, I miss her a lot.
Stacey's mum Helen died after being beaten so badly by her partner she was unrecognisable. He had a history of domestic abuse and assault convictions. He was released from jail on licence and deemed by probation to be medium risk. Stacey says a mistake which proved fatal for her mum.
They came out to my house, actually, and they sat here for 2 hours and all they said was sorry. And sorry's not good enough because it's still happening. Like, other families are still going through the trauma that we went through as a family. And it's horrific, it really is.
The Probation Service has been mired in controversy for the past decade. It was partially privatised in 2014 under a supposedly revolutionary plan from the then Justice Secretary Chris Grayling. Widely decried as a devastating and damaging failure, it was renationalised in 2020. The government told us today that serious further offences are rare, but we learn from each of them. And we're investing £155 million more every year to improve probation. The opposition say the numbers tell a different story.
But it's shocking that there are rapists and murderers allowed to wander around on our streets without appropriate supervision because of failings in the probation service. And the government knows about these failings. This is not the first time there's been a report telling them this. This is not the first time they've been told there is a serious shortage of probation officers and unmanageable levels of workload, all of which is damaging their ability to properly manage those offenders. The government have known about this for years, to be frank.
Private grief made public, deaths which could have been avoided. The Probation Service, already under huge pressure, now under greater scrutiny too, after failing too many times to keep dangerous offenders from offending again in the most terrible way.
Well, we asked the Ministry of Justice to come onto the programme to discuss the issues raised in Jackie's report that you just heard there, but we were told no one is available. I am joined now by Nazir Afzal, the former Chief Crown Prosecutor for the North West of England. Mr Afzal, what is your reaction to what this whistleblower has told us? The idea that criminals being released are made to seem lower risk as a way to save money.
It's shocking, but not surprising. What we are seeing now is the culmination of a dozen years of austerity, of resources being cut, of privatisation. If you remember, probation services were privatised 6-7 years ago, and then brought back into the public sector, a significant loss of senior management, a significant loss of supervisors, more than a quarter fewer staff. This is a tragedy that's been waiting to happen. These tragedies that we've been experiencing recently could have been forecast and were forecast. And the figures that you've just alluded to, the amount of rapes and attempts rapes and homicides being carried out by people who are supposed to be supervised, should shock us to the core. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to shock this government. When they brought about austerity, 25% reduction straight away. When they privatised, it lost a significant amount of senior staff and senior managers, supervisors, and now you've got an overwhelmed service, people who are trying to work really hard, very often with fingers behind their backs, crossing their fingers, hoping for the best. And as we just heard a moment ago, perhaps some internal targets which are trying to reduce the risk to enable them to work within current resources, but ultimately putting us all in danger.
I mean, we talk about targets and resources and management, but ultimately these are people's lives. And knowing that the horrors faced by Zara Alina, Terry Harris, many others, could perhaps have been stopped, it's pretty chilling.
I'll be blunt with you, they and others like them would not be dead today if people were able to do their jobs, if people were properly resourced to do their job, if people were able to manage the risks that these individuals that carried out these terrible crimes were able to be managed. And these failures, I heard a moment ago about lessons being learned, and I imagine lots of eyebrows were raised up and down the country. Lessons are not learned. Every single time these tragedies happen, there'll be another one. It seems to me that they simply hope that tomorrow's newspapers will have something else to deal with rather than the consequences of these failures. And I'm afraid to say these failures will be repeated. We are in a broken system, not just in probation, in policing, in prosecution, in the courts and judges. Every day, somebody in the justice system will tell me that they're not coping. And because of the lack of emergency, or the lack of urgency, or the lack of support, the lack of attention being given to this, there'll be more deaths and there'll be more lessons that will be not learnt.
The government says it's investing £155 million a year into probation. Is this purely a funding issue?
No, you've lost hundreds, if not thousands, of very experienced probation officers. You can't replace hundreds and thousands of years of experience with new people coming out of probation school, for want of a better term. The reality is that we cannot build the experience that we need by simply bringing new people in. We've lost that. We will take a decade or more now to regain that level of experience. There are short-term things that can be done. There are hundreds of probation officers retired who can be brought in to help with the current workload. We can try and deal with the caseloads that are currently going through the court and make sure that more courts are opened. We can help the police investigate more crimes. All of these things can be done right away to minimise the impact. But I'm afraid to say, Fatima, somebody will die next month that should not die if somebody in probation or somebody in the justice system could have done something differently.
That's a pretty chilling message to leave us with, but we're going to have to leave it there because of time issues. Nazir Afzal, thank you very much for joining us.